And in trying to test him, he said to Jesus, "What must I do to gain everlasting life?" And Jesus said, "You know the scriptures. What did they tell you?" And the man said, "They said you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And you should love others just as you love yourself." And Jesus said, "That is a good answer. Do that, and you will enter into eternal life." But the man, wishing to justify his question, said, "But who is my neighbor?" And Christ answered his question by telling a story. And he said, "Once there was a man that left Jerusalem to walk to Jericho. And he fell in with robbers, who took everything he had and then beat him almost to death and left him lying in the ditch. And after a while, a priest came along and saw him and just went over to the other side of the road and kept on walking. And later on, a Levite came along and did the same thing. But finally, a Samaritan man came along and saw him and was moved to compassion. And he went down and helped him, and he poured wine in his wounds and put oil in his wounds to help heal them. And he lifted him up upon his own donkey and took him to an inn that was not too far away. And he took care of this man all night. And in the morning he came down and gave the innkeeper 2 pieces of silver and said, "You take care of him. And if you go beyond this, I will pay you whatever I owe you when I come back." And then Jesus said to the Pharisee, "Which of those men do you think acted as a neighbor to that man in the ditch?" And the Pharisee said, "The one who treated him with compassion." And Jesus said, "Go and do this, and you will enter into eternal life." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
I was recently reading a book where the author said, if the only thing we knew about Jesus was contained in the parable of the prodigal son and in the parable of the Good Samaritan, we would know almost everything that we need to know about him. The parable of the prodigal son gives us an image of who God the Father really is, which was meant to change the way we approach everything. And the parable of the Good Samaritan teaches us how we should live. And that's quite a statement, but those 2 parables are very powerful. They are both contained in Luke. And the parable of the Good Samaritan is quite striking. Those 2 men that ignored him, said it was a priest and a Levite, they would both be kind of the priestly group. Most of the priests of Israel came from the tribe of Levi. everybody in the tribe of Levi was not a priest. But they were both kind of considered kind of very sacred in Israel. And they ignored this man. I think you could say that they did so because they couldn't identify with him. And so they could more easily pass him by. They couldn't look at him and say, that could happen to me. And we're kind of in that category. I think if any of us saw a guy laying in the gutter on the way home, we would stop and try to help him. I certainly would. And I think everybody would. But one of the joy of our lives is we don't live in a neighborhood where people end up in the gutter. Hooray for us. So we're not put to that test. But we know that there are people who live in the gutter around the world. But we don't exactly identify with them. I'm really talking about what is our circle of concern. Who exists within our circle of concern? In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, if you only love your own relatives and those who are good to you, what's so great about that? Pagans do that. Who exists in our circle of concern? We hear about an earthquake in Bangladesh that maybe is killing thousands, and we think that's too bad, that's a shame. But we don't lose any sleep over it, because they are others. We can't look at them and say, that could be me. And they are outside our circle of concern. And we'd like to think that no one is outside our circle of concern. But of course, that's ridiculous. There are people all over the world, and we can't be losing sleep over every one of them. We can't cure all the evils of the world. But we can acknowledge and know that we are mightily blessed in the lives we live. And it's possible that we can enlarge our circle of concern. And we can think of others. A tragedy like an earthquake in Bangladesh, we just say that's too bad. But when something happens like this in the Chatterton family, that's personal. Because they're one of us. And they've been the very heart of St. Ambrose Parish since it began. And all of you, especially those of you who have small children, you can look at your small children and say, oh, boy, that could happen to me. And so we're involved with that. And I think the parable of the prodigal son is saying we should enlarge our circle of concern. And how do we do that? And I really don't know. I don't have a roadmap for that. But we can do it by showing concern for people that we do not know in the world. And in recent years, we've had a whole bunch of second collections. And every time I announce that we're going to have a second collection day, I hear kind of a bit of a moan. Most of it comes from me. But almost, as I recall, almost all of those second collections are for people in our own country or in other countries who are suffering from great poverty. The last one was the Pope's collection to support the charities that the Vatican distributes throughout the world. And last week we heard about the Food Resource Bank, which is trying to help others on other continents to grow their own food. We have opportunities to show that we are aware that our brothers and sisters in other places are suffering, and we care. We can't cure the problem, but we don't need to be part of the problem, but by our disinterest. So I'd like you to think about that idea. How could I enlarge my circle of concern? A great example of this, and someone that has always been a great example to me, was the Indian leader of India, Mahatma Gandhi. And he patterned his whole life from the Sermon on the Mount and what Jesus taught. Somewhere in his life, he came across a man who was wandering around, and he was a leper. And Mahatma Gandhi took him home, and he lived with him till he died. And every morning, Mahatma Gandhi would help him take a bath, and then he would put the medication on him. He didn't want to just help the poor. He wanted to identify with them. Wow. He wanted to join them. Whenever he took a trip on a train, he traveled third class. And they say in third class, if the average person from the West got in there, the smell would be so bad you would faint. But he always traveled third class. And he was asked once at an interview, why do you always travel third class? And he said, because there isn't any fourth class. And I think it should be kind of embarrassing for us to realize that the finest Christian in the 20th century